and welcome to a very special edition of To Heal DC on today, the centennial birthday of Malcolm X. We're very honored to be part of this all-day celebration here on WPFW. This is Joni, and I am honored and happy to have with me Dr. Greg Carr, Dr. Greg Kamati Carr, joining us today to honor Malcolm X. We're going to be talking a lot about Malcolm, of course, including lessons for organizing from our wonderful brother. And what would he be doing today? What would he recommend today? But let's start. Welcome, Greg Carr.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Joni, as always, you and Mike and the whole family. And I'm glad to be in conversation around this brother on the 100th anniversary of his birth. And we evoke his parents, of course, Earl and Louise, and are grateful for them to bring him to the planet.
Absolutely. And it feels like there's even more love for Malcolm these days, this year, especially on this 100th anniversary. And I thought maybe we would start, or you could start wherever you would like, Greg, but sharing some of the love that people that we know have had for Malcolm, including John Henry Clark, including Sonia Sanchez, including Fannie Lou Hamer, Nelson Mandela. This is some things that, of course, the mainstream media doesn't really talk about. But perhaps you could share some of your thoughts about these wonderful heroes of ours that also love Malcolm.
Absolutely. And of course, that's a beautiful way for us to be reminded of the importance of this space, the importance of supporting this space with our dollars. We know that the overwhelming majority of people who are listening right now, either because they don't have the means or have not yet invested a portion of their means to support the station, haven't done it. But on behalf, especially of those who don't have the means, who rely on this as a lifeline, we want everybody who does have the means to, pinch off a little and support this station and this platform and this space, because this is the space where these kind of conversations held, will be held, and as long as we support it, will always be held. And that's very natural kind of segue for that. So as we know, Joni, an event one of many events celebrating Malcolm this month of May, and then including in going over into July at Sankofa Video and Books, we were all together, Joni, this previous week on Wednesday night to be in conversation with Barbara Peter Bailey around the video screening of the film Make It Plain, one of the best films on Malcolm, where you see the producers, which includes our own beloved Judy Richardson from SNCC, and,
yes.
and of course, so much later, I was talking with our sister at Teaching for Change about that. And she was saying, Judy couldn't get there Wednesday, but she wanted to send her love. So shout out to her and to Deborah Minkart at Teaching for Change. But I saw that as a backdrop because Peter Bailey, of course, was featured in the conversation as he was featured in the film, one of Malcolm's lieutenants, who has actually convened a group of people that are going to have a ritual tonight at Howard University Blackburn Auditorium at 6 p.m. To mark the centennial of Malcolm's birth. And Barbara Peter was one of Malcolm's closest lieutenants, editor of the Organization of Afro-American Unity's newsletter, Black Lash. And of course, so many programs from PFW, Barbara Kaba, you, of course, Joni, as always, were there to hear about these personal relationships. Sonia Sanchez, who first heard Malcolm speak in Harlem when she was there living and working, who said the first time she encountered him, she said, well, I liked what you said. I didn't agree with everything, and then she said, he looked at her and said, well, sister, one day you will. And of course, our sister Sonia, just having passed her 90th birthday late last year, has written so many poems and plays and been involved in so much organizing and activism and work around him. You mentioned, of course, was one of our great Jegnas, was someone was very close with John Henry Clark out of Union Springs, Alabama, and Columbus, Georgia, who was one of Malcolm's chief lieutenants. That organization of Afro-American Unity that Baba Peter was a founding member of and is the last living founding member of it in terms of walking on top of the earth. That organization was drawn up in part in John Henry Clark's living room in Harlem. And John Clark provided historical materials for Malcolm. Malcolm always talked about him. And on the day that Malcolm was assassinated, Dr. Clark was speaking in a home, in a private home. Yes. And the people said, well, he was an anti-Semite. And of course, Dr. Clark, knowing that that was not true, didn't, bother arguing with these people. He said he went into the bathroom and he cried for 30 minutes because he had lost his dear friend. And then finally, of course, as you mentioned, we talked about this in class with Carr this past Saturday in session 171 with Karen Hunter. We talked about the great Fannie Lou Hamer. We opened with a small clip of her in an interview where she was asked about Malcolm X, and she said Malcolm X was one of the closest friends that she had ever had. And she talked about how she was invested in the same struggle that he was invested in. She said, we didn't agree on everything, but one of the things that I love about him is character, how he fought. And of course, that was a mirror of hers, as Baba Peter said, when we were all together last week. He said, I was there that night that Malcolm X introduced Fannie Lou Hamer in Harlem as she was traveling the country. And he said, that was the only time and the time that I knew Malcolm that he was tongue-tied. He had never seen Malcolm tongue-tied and kind of flustering, except that night that he met one of his heroes and close friends, of course, Fannie Lou Hamer.
Wow. And I neglected to properly introduce Dr. Greg Carr. Of course, he is, as many of you do know, he's a professor at Howard University, Africana Studies, but he's also on many different platforms. One of the easiest ways to find him is on YouTube, In Class with Carr. Every week, you can easily find that just by Googling YouTube In Class with Carr, but he is also now on 3 days a week on Sirius XM, our morning view, Urban View, 3 days a week, Wednesday through Friday. He can be heard with Roland Martin and much, much more. But I encourage you, the easy way for those of you who have not been listening to Dr. Greg Carr on a regular basis, check him out on YouTube, In Class with Carr. And we're so happy and honored to have you on today celebrating Malcolm's 100th birthday. And it does feel extremely special today, especially the times we continue to face. But it does seem like there's a lot of love and appreciation for Malcolm as we move forward.
Absolutely. I agree. Right? It's interesting, as we know, when he was alive, it's interesting in the Joni, that, for this man to be born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925 to parents who instilled in him the value of Black self-determination and human liberation because they were members of the Garvey movement. It's interesting for a man to have been born at a time when the largest movement of African people globally in the history of African people was something that he was literally born into. His mother from Grenada by way of Canada, his father from Georgia, but both of them chief organizers who opened divisions of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World in Omaha, Nebraska, and Lansing, Michigan, and traveling around the country. And then at the moment of his assassination on February 21st, 1965, there in Harlem, he arguably had a reach that in terms of awareness rivaled that of the organization that his parents had been a member of 39 years and almost 40 years before. But as you say, after his assassination, millions and millions more over the arc of what has now been 60 years became aware of Malcolm X, became interested in his words and his efforts, joined, generally speaking, his righteous cause of human liberation. And his assassination in some ways broke him out of a narrower concept of Black nationalism in the United States and introduced him as a human liberation figure. And arguably, he's more influential now than he was even during his lifetime. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to him, there's so many quotes. I'm going to just give one quote I was listening to this morning. I don't believe in fighting only one fight, but only one front, but on all fronts. And certainly Malcolm has done that, including healthcare. One of my favorite quotes is the only difference between wellness and illness is we. and that's
How about that?
and that's right. Important to say today as we're facing a horrific cutback in Medicaid. And of course, Malcolm would be right out there with us fighting to preserve what little we do have in terms of healthcare services. But
essentially, Joni, before we move from that, I think that's an important thing to really lift up. One of the sisters who is in the documentary Make It Plain was interviewed, Sister Sharon. At the time, she's known as Sharon X. Well, soon she would be known. She's 14 years old. Wow. They were protesting when she met Malcolm X. They were protesting at, as you remember, Harlem Hospital.
That's right.
And of course, Harlem Hospital occupying a central role in the daily lives of the poor, Black folk and brown folk in New York at that time in the 1950s. And she talked about how they were protesting and they were laying down in front of the bulldozers. And Malcolm X went to her and said, I agree with your general objective, but do you think these people who would lynch us in the South would have have any hesitation to run over you with that bulldozer? And she said after that, she continued in her protests, coming after school. But what she said, I never laid down in front of a bulldozer again because he made a lot of sense. She joined the Nation of Islam, had a long career as an educator in Harlem, did so much work. But that question of healthcare is important because one of the other people that Malcolm encountered during this time was a sister out of Minnesota by the name of Anna Arnold Hedgeman. Anna Hedgeman worked very closely with, in fact, she was a chief lieutenant of A. Philip Randolph in the Fair Employment Practices Committee of the 1940s. She helped outline and execute the March on Washington in 1963. And Malcolm became part of a brain trust that included elected officials like A. Philip Randolph, organizers like Adam Clayton Powell, organizers like A. Philip Randolph, and Anna Arnold Hedgeman. And that's one of the reasons that collective decided that the March on Washington would be for jobs and justice. And part of the question of justice would be putting a floor under the least, in terms of material resources, the least resource of us. And that would include healthcare and education. And so people think about the dream of Martin Luther King. No, that march was crafted around the basic needs of people. And Malcolm was absolutely a part of that organization. And that it gives us a chance to lift up the name of the great Anna Arnold Hedgeman, who spent her life struggling for those very same things, including healthcare.
Absolutely. And people don't know and don't remember that the March on Washington led to the enactment of Medicare, largely because of Black physicians and others organizing for that during the march. And as I'm glad you, of course, mentioned A. Philip Randolph, and you shared, I heard you say the other day that this is going to be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the sleeping car porters. Is that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The 100th anniversary. And I always like to lift up not just the sleeping car porters, because we know the name of the organization was the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, 1925, as you say, but also the chambermaids, because Black women worked on those trains as well. They did all the duties, not as much of the physical lifting and carrying, but all of the attending to the white passengers on those Pullman cars was done by the chambermaids as well. So yes, those women and men. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've learned that there are several listeners, probably many listeners, whose relatives were among those women, as you just mentioned. They call them women who were sleeping car porters. So sometime in the near future, we're going to focus on that history.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, that's great to hear.
Yes. Yes. I could start calling their names of people, but I'm not going to do it. We're going to have a show that focuses on women that are part of the WPFW family who have ancestors who were women who were part of the sleeping car porters. So that's also part of Malcolm's history. So let's focus, continue to focus on Malcolm's organizing lessons. Maybe start with sharing with listeners who may not know what the OAAU was and why it's still important today.
Oh, absolutely. The OAAU was something called the Organization for Afro-American Unity. And this was an organization that Malcolm created along with a few of his friends and former and associates, even some from the Nation of Islam, which of course he had been put out of, suspended indefinitely from. And in 1964, at the beginning of the year, in January, he announced the formation of both the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which he said was an organization for anyone who was Muslim, who wanted to join, who was looking for a home, not just former members of the Nation of Islam. Of course, he had been to Mecca. He had been to Africa 2 times. In fact, he spent much of the last year of his life across the African continent. And he also then organized and announced the creation of the Organization for Afro-American Unity in that summer. He had come back from Africa, where he had been an observer at the Organization of African Unity, which was the creation of it was a formation that consisted of all the independent countries in Africa as they were taking their independence. This is 1964. And Malcolm was invited to not only observe the.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break from this pre-recorded show. This is Joni listening to Dr. Greg Carr as we focus on this third hour of our, I think it's 16 hours of programming that goes all the way up till midnight tonight. This is the last day of our Spring Pledge Drive, and Magic Mike's going to tell me if we have any thank you people to thank yet. But if not, you can go to the phones, 202-588-9739. Go to the website, wpfwfm.org. Of course, you can also Cash App and text us. Maybe Mike can help me announce that. But this is a very, very special day, of course, in history, but also on WPFW, the last day of our Spring Pledge Drives dedicated to none other than Malcolm X. Again, thank you for Katia for pulling this together. And we have thank you gifts. We haven't had thank you gifts lately, but today we have amazing thank you gifts to remember this day. 2 basic gifts. One for $150. You can get all of today's programming. And again, that starts at 8 a.m., goes till midnight, and will include not only Julianne Malveaux, myself, but coming up next, Mawiza Muntali and James Pope, Malcolm's relationship with influence in Africa. 12 noon, Malcolm X Voices with Vision, No Sellout. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., Askia Muhammad, an encore presentation of Malcolm and music. 2 hours of Askia. 5 p.m., we're giving a round of applause to the return of Ambrose I. Lane Jr., who's been away for a while, recovering, but he's going to be with us today at 5. 6 p.m., Mimi Rosenberg. 7 p.m., Reflections with Nkichi. And then from 8 till midnight, music, Brother Oz Collective with Brother Craig, and DJ Underground from 10 to midnight by Any Frequency Necessary. Again, you can have these shows for a pledge of $150. $150. They're downloadable. You also can get the Centennial Digital Pack, which includes all kinds of speeches, including John Henry Clark, the Ballad or the Bullet. There are about 10 different speeches that are included in this digital pack. Again, that for $150. But together, you can have both of those for $250. And I'm telling you, it's a very precious gift that only PFW is offering. And I was thinking about Malcolm, and I was struggling to find various speeches. You can have all of these speeches at your fingertips, but all you have to do is move your fingertips, to call 202-588-9739 or go to the website wpfwfm.org. Mikey, do we have any pledges yet? Not yet. We have a goal of $750, folks. You can do it. You know, we need WPFW now more than ever. We cannot afford to let, even though the so-called president has not attacked us yet, we have other reasons that we need to be aware that we need to protect ourselves. So we cannot afford to lose WPFW in 2025. So please, folks, this is the last day we're asking for your support. And let's go back now to the pre-recorded program with Dr. Greg Carr organizing lessons from our Black Shining Prince on his 100th birthday. What would Brother Malcolm do now?
AU, which is now known as the African Union. And by the way, the African Union will be meeting in Addis Ababa in September. The theme of that meeting, which is the year-long theme of the African Union, is reparations. So I think we probably need a WPFW delegation, Joni. So get that backpack. We might need you over there to observe this because this will be the first meeting of the African Union where there will be a formal representation from the countries of the Caribbean. So, and of course, there's been a long-standing commitment to include the Africans, not only of the Caribbean and Latin America, but the Africans of the United States and other parts of the diaspora as well. So this is a unique opportunity. But Malcolm was there at the meeting of the African Union's predecessor, the Organization of African Union. He met with many heads of state in Africa, with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Ben Bella in from Algeria, of course, Gamal Abdel Nasser from what is now Egypt. And he also met with Anwar Sadat, who was, of course, second to Nasser while he was in Egypt the first time he went. I think it was 1959. Anyway, he came back to the United States determined, after having submitted a memorandum to the African Union, talking about how we should be connected globally. He came back and said, let me do something about that. So he formed the Organization of African American Unity, which reflected that political agenda, that growing political agenda that came, as I said, December of 1964, after spending nearly 5 months in Africa and lobbying for a plan that he had announced at the beginning of that year to take the United States of America to the United Nations and accused the United States of committing genocide against people of African descent. Now, this was 1964, which was 13 years after his friend and comrade Paul Robeson. Yes, along with another friend he would meet in Ghana, Shirley Graham Du Bois, and her husband, W.E.B. Du Bois, who had made transition the year before Malcolm got to Ghana. William and Louise Thompson Patterson, so many others. I'm thinking about these couples who were so important in this, James and Esther Cooper Jackson, so many others, brought the United States before the United Nations with a petition called "We Charge Genocide," which we've heard people talk about many times on these airways, include our friend and brother Gerald Horn. So the OAAU was an attempt to link the folk of the diaspora to the continent of Africa, and to this day, there are members of the OAAU. Peter Bailey is the only living surviving member to this day who was at the founding, was part of the founding. But there are others like James Small, who was in New York, Professor Small, who leads a pilgrimage every year. In fact, as we are on the air here, they are at the gravesite of Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X in the cemetery there in New York. The OAAU continues in a different form, but that struggle and the OAAU continued.
Absolutely. And that pilgrimage, folks, I think started on Friday night, making that pilgrimage. And so they're continuing through the weekend. And as we are in the air today, definitely, I guess they're there at the gravesite by now. So
and of course, I think Paul Robeson's in that same cemetery, if memory serves me correctly.
Oh, wow.
Joni. Yeah, I think Robeson.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington. Yeah.
We'll
have to look it up.
I think Louis Armstrong is near where my mom lived in Queens, so I know that cemetery. But we could check it out.
Yeah,
so
maybe
again,
I'm wrong on that. Yes.
but Paul Robeson Okay, that's important to know, and I'm
That's
sure we're
right.
going to be.
That's right. That's right. Flushing. That's right. Flushing.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
Malcolm X is in Ferncliff in Hartsdale, New York. Yes. Yes.
Okay, yes, and I thought Paul Robeson maybe was in Philadelphia, but certainly their spirits are there together. That's for sure. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
uh, you are listening to a special version of To Heal DC on the 100th anniversary of Malcolm X, Brother Malcolm X's birthday. This is an all-day program here on WPFW going into the evening, and we are proud and happy to be speaking with Dr. Greg Carr. And one of our focuses this morning is the organizing lessons of Brother Malcolm.
Mhm.
So I heard you speaking about some of Brother Malcolm's recommendations, and I'm not sure when that was in New York City around elections. And
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Well,
you made the important point that the idea of having a third party is nothing new. That's not a
no.
new idea. I can remember my grandparents talking about the third party, but tell us what some of the things that Malcolm was doing or thinking about organizing around elections that we don't really hear about much.
Oh, absolutely. The conversation we were having the other night really kind of, I think, was sparked by someone sitting in the community and we were conversation about Peter, and they were asking about organizing. And, that's all about Peter talks about now. He says, we got to organize with the people who are ready to organize. If you got
Mm-hmm.
40 people and 10 of them say they're ready to do something, let's do something. If the other 30 are saying we're not ready, say, okay, that's fine. We'll come back around to y'all. But do not spend the rest of your time trying to argue with those 30 people to get them to join the 10. Take the 10 and go. So
Mm-hmm.
do some work. And that really is, in many ways, the logic of third party politics. The idea, we live in a duopoly. Chris Hedges, of course, has described contemporary U.S. politics as a battle between the corporatists and the oligarchs. The corporatists want stability; they want things to run smoothly. And many of them now, the Democratic Party, they don't want a lot of ruckus. Let's just make this money and do this investment and go. The oligarchs wanted to smash the system, destroy the system, and sell it off for parts. As you said, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned Medicare, Medicaid. You're talking about the oligarchs said, let's get all that public tax dollars and give it to our billionaire friends. We don't care about those people. Whereas the corporatists would say, no, you got to have some floor under the way. Otherwise, you're going to have revolution and you're going to have problems and it's going to create instability and we won't make our money. So, but the third party, what would a third party do in a system like we have here in the United States right now, where you have a Democratic Party and a Republican Party? Well, we've seen the Greens and we've seen the parties for, socialism and liberation and all these kind of things. And it always strikes me that when these parties, they don't show up only during presidential election times, but they get the loudest during those presidential election
Right.
times. And so, now, for example, here we are in May 2025, and we're hearing so much from the Greens and so much from the Reform Party and so much from the PSL. And wait, hold on, let me see. Oh, no, we're not hearing much of anything. Okay, so why do y'all only start talking when it's time to run for president? Malcolm X made this point, and this is why he could be so enamored with and in solidarity with Fannie Lou Hamer,
Mm-hmm.
who helped start a third party, the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. But they didn't do a third party to just inject themselves in presidential politics, even though they went to Atlantic City in 1964. They did that so that they could gather people who have a common interest and shared goals to organize and then begin to impact the system. So they didn't just have an MFDP convention in Mississippi. They then went to the Democrats and said, we demand to be seated as the legitimate delegation for the Democratic Party out of Mississippi. Well, people say, well, how could they do that? Because political parties don't just mean organizing for electoral participation. Political parties means organized people for political participation broadly, not just elections. So Malcolm said in New York, he said, I think all of us should be registered to vote. He said, don't register as a Democrat, don't register as a Republican, register as an independent.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, but we have to impact the system. Now, as people say, well, he wasn't talking about, no, he wasn't talking about the Democrats, the Republicans. But if this were 2025, Would he tell you to sit on the sideline in a presidential election where only one of either the Democrat or the Republican would win? Remember, he was very good friends with Adam Clayton Powell, who was an
Yes.
elected Democratic member of Congress. So after the death of Malcolm X, you see all these independent formations continue, and as you said, they predate them. Your parents talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, of course, Eugene Debs running for president, socialists back in the
That's right.
20s. So you have these parties. Well, what happens is that you have people like the Malcolm X Society, which becomes the Republic of New Africa in Detroit, Richard Henry and Milton Henry, Gaidi and Mario Bedelli, who knew that one of the members of their formation, the RNA, as they moved to Mississippi, Chokwe Lumumba, his son would be the current mayor of Jackson, Mississippi.
That's right.
He didn't run on an independent party slate. He ran as a Democrat, and Chokwe Lumumba, Antar, is the mayor of Jackson. Look at what happened in 1972, when Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King, sitting together, helped open the meeting in Gary, 1972, of the National Independent Black Political Party. Amir Baraka chaired that meeting, co-chaired it. Charles Diggs, Jesse Jackson, so many others. Dick Gregory, our beloved Bobby Dick Gregory. They organized for Black political power. After that convention, that was the same year Shirley Chisholm ran on the Democratic ticket, by the way, you saw thousands of Black people in the years after 1972 run and win office across the United States of America, mostly as Democrats, some Republicans. But the point is this: independent parties are absolutely necessary. Having been formed, those parties then have to decide how best to intervene to help people achieve the goal of better healthcare, better education, and ultimately full systemic change. But you don't start at the top of the meeting every 4 years. You start every day by organizing people. And so we absolutely support independent parties. And so did Malcolm X. So-called third and fourth and fifth parties. We have to just understand. Well, I should say one other thing. Political parties aren't in the U.S. Constitution. In fact, of all people, the criminal, and I call him a criminal because he was a human trafficker named George Washington, warned people against political parties. He said this could be the death of the United States as a concept. Political parties are a problem. And remember that the crisis that led to the Civil War also led to the erosion and ultimately implosion of one of the major political parties of the day, the Whigs. Over the issue of slavery at one point, and the emergence in the 1850s of a party, the Republican Party, which had as its common interest, among other things, free trade and business and capitalism at its core. And slavery was bad for business. It wasn't a moral issue, although some people who saw slavery as a moral issue joined the Republican Party. And over the arc of the next century, the Republican Party took a position that could be considered much more radical than it does today. But once Black folk, some of them like Fannie Lou Hamer, coming in because of independent party politics that they then infused the Democratic Party with, once they joined the Democratic Party and broke through the voting rights challenges, well, where did those white nationalists go who were in the Democratic Party, the party of Andrew Jackson, a purebred racist? Well, they fled, but they didn't create an independent party on their own. They fled into the Republican Party. And since they're in the Republican Party now, people say, well, wasn't there a Tea Party? Was that a party? In some ways, a kind of proto-party, yes. Well, what about the MAGA movement? Is that a party? No. They captured the Republican Party apparatus. And that's the status, that's the state we're in now.
Yes. And we have to think about organizing to capture the Democratic Party, perhaps.
Yes.
I want to, again, we're talking to Dr. Greg Carr on the 100th anniversary birthday of Malcolm X, and thinking about his organizing lessons for today. Some things that you rarely hear discussed is what would Malcolm be doing today in terms of organizing, particularly when it comes to these elections. I want to also lift up, we're talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, but very much linked to Fannie Lou Hamer is some PFW family members, and that is Dory Ladner and Lawrence Guillot, who are right there with Fannie Lou Hamer, helped her organize and bring her into the movement. They were locked up with her in jail. And so we're very proud of our ancestors, too, Dory Ladner and Lawrence Guillot, together with Fannie Lou Hamer. But let's continue to talk, Greg, about what Malcolm might be suggesting. And of course, we can also lift up who's very much still with us, Ross Baraka, certainly ran on the Democratic Party, and look at how
That's
much
right.
he's being attacked.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
and apparently he's going to have a trial in July for standing up for the people. He's going to be on trial. So Ross
Of
Barack,
course.
also member of the Democratic Party.
Yes. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that because it gives us an opportunity to think about obviously when his parents and his mother, I mean, of course, is still on top of the earth, and
Yes.
the great ancestor, her partner, Mary Baraka, when they formed, among with others, the Committee for a Unified Newark,
Mm-hmm.
and got involved in electoral politics and helped get put into office Kenneth Gibson, the first Black mayor of
Yes.
Newark. And of course, we just saw actually last week the transition of Sharp James, the former mayor of Newark, and their son Ras Baraka, a university graduate. Ras would not be where he is if he didn't use that two-party apparatus to move forward. And of course, the night that he won that mayoral election, he gave his famous speech where he said, you know, when I'm the mayor, we're the mayor. And he has worked very
Yes.
hard to make that real. And of course, they have to come after him because that's their objective. This oligarchy, the corporatists as well. You got to attack anyone who is representing the people. And of course, coming out after the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, out of the seed that was planted in Chicago, Operation Breadbasket, we had our brother Jesse Lewis Jackson and the emergence of the
Mm-hmm.
Rainbow Coalition. We know there in Vermont that Bernie Sanders was the leader of the Rainbow Coalition organizing efforts during the Jackson campaign of '84 and '88. And then he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. So when we see Bernie Sanders is independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats in the federal legislature, and he brings their fire to the floor of the United States Senate every day. We have to be sophisticated. And so when we start talking about what Malcolm will be doing.
Okay, folks, we're coming back at you for a pledge. We have 0 pledges so far. And, you know, Malcolm talks about by any means necessary. We need to keep this radio station alive and strong now more than ever by any means necessary, which includes making a pledge. We have some really special thank you gifts, which we haven't been having lately. You can have a whole recording of today's 16 hours of programming for a pledge of $150. You can also have a whole digital pack. Both of these thank you gifts are digital. This has many, many, many speeches that you can have. And I'm telling you, these speeches can be hard to find on your own, but this is all brought together. John Henry Clark, 2 special speeches with Malcolm's sister, of course, The Ballot or the Bullet, Friends and Enemies, Prospects for Freedom, Choice of Two Roads, many, many speeches from Malcolm for a pledge of $150. Together, $250. So, folks, will somebody be the first person to pledge on this show in honor of Malcolm X, in honor of WPFW doing 16 hours of programming on Malcolm X? This is our last day of the spring pledge drive. And it's really critical. You know, some of this money goes to pay our folks. We need our folks to get paid. We have a very tiny staff, and certainly our engineers, Magic Mike and Kalia and the rest of them, need to get a paycheck. And so does Katia and the other paid staff. So, folks, I'm not sure why we're not getting pledges today, but we need you. We need you now. We need you now more than ever. Part of our PFW family has helped to put together this event this evening at Howard University. Brother Jawara Hunter, who's part of PFW from Harlem, helped to put this together. You can hear this evening not only Peter Bailey, but you can hear our own Esther Vera, Cillian Green, Kenny Carroll, and poet Laini Mataka. That's tonight at Howard. But let's go back to the recorded program with Dr. Carr. We hope to thank at least a few of you by the end of the program.
Engaged across the full spectrum. We even see how Malcolm grew beyond the organization that is in many ways brought him back to his childhood roots and in some ways saved his life, which was, of course, the Nation of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And that organization, which, Malcolm's siblings, his brothers, sisters were involved in and got him involved in while he was still in prison. That organization gave Malcolm a platform where he could use all his skills, very charismatic, brilliant, beautiful orator, hard worker, incredibly disciplined, as Peter always talks about that, Peter Bailey. Well, he joined the Nation of Islam, and its appeal is something that gives us another lesson in organizing. You should, if you want to organize in a community, you shouldn't start in the boardrooms and in the city council meetings and among the politicians and the lobbyists and the business owners. Why don't you start with the people who are most in need? And in the Nation, of course, they call it to this day fishing, taking that metaphor from the Quran and from the Bible in terms of fishing for people. These are the folks who are in the worst way, who have the least resources. And Malcolm recruited a number of those folk because in many ways, certainly after the state broke up his family as his father was murdered, and then his mother was sent to a mental health facility where she remained for over 25 years, Malcolm was errant. They wanted to split up the children, send them to foster homes. Malcolm cycled through that until his sister, Ella, sent for him and he went to live in Boston. Well, that's social welfare. That's a social welfare agency. It's a social welfare agency we might call the family. The Black family, in that case, intervened. It's not state welfare, like what the current public housing occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue has. It isn't heavily subsidized state welfare like the current resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue has, as he golfs every weekend with our tax dollars and flies around the world and gets offered $400 million jets. And this man is the biggest welfare recipient in the history of humanity. But Ella Collins didn't have that kind of money. What she had was love for her nephew. And that's how Malcolm ends up in Boston. But then he grows beyond that. He starts working on the railroad and he's between Boston and New York. And guess what? He falls in with the hustler crowd. There are more hustlers in the United States of America than there are senators and city council women and men. So Malcolm learns the ways of the street. But when he joins the Nation of Islam after coming out of prison, after having get caught up in that life, he uses those skills to organize. He can talk to people in the language they speak. That's a lesson for today. Don't go into the street talking with people as if you're lecturing them, as if you're somehow looking down on them. They will reject you, and they should reject you immediately. Go like Malcolm X. Meet people where they are. Go like Fannie Lou Hamer. Go like Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture. Go like Dory Ladner, who was a social worker so long here in the district, worked in the hospitals, did so much work. If we could hear from Mama Dory right now, and of course, thanks to Lance Reynolds, we have so many recorded episodes where she came on Saturdays and taught us these lessons. She'll say, enter the lives of people where they are and help them transform their lives by asking them what they need and then helping them acquire it. That's what Joyce and Dory Ladner and Charlie Cobb and Courtney Cox and everybody and Bob Moses said they learned from one of the great organizers of the 20th century, our dear ancestor Ella Jo Baker out of Virginia. And that's what they said they learned from her. Meet people where they are. And that's another lesson we can learn from Malcolm.
Absolutely. And as we know, the ancestors are still with us. Certainly Dory Ladner is still with us, and we're happy that Joyce is. Some of us went to a very special concert on Friday night honoring Bernice Johnson Reagan, and of course, starting with the Freedom Singers. And as people were singing beautifully that night on Friday, we could hear, some of us definitely heard Dory Ladner singing right in there with them. So, and also, speaking of the Nation of Islam, I'm proud to announce that at 1 p.m. today, Monday, you can hear an encore. You're going to hear an encore presentation by Askia Muhammad, apparently sharing some of the music related to Malcolm X. So that is our own, very much with us ancestor Askia Muhammad today.
Wow. Yes. Wonderful. Listen, it's so good to hear you raise his name. We miss him every day. So I'm going to be tuned in to hear Askia Muhammad, our brother. Oh, yes, who, of course, no stranger to not only the Nation of Islam, but using culture to organize. Thank you, Joni, for raising that. Thank you,
Yes.
WPFW. We can't wait to hear about us.
Yeah,
Yes, indeed.
that's right, at 1 p.m. And of course, we're also blessed to have Brother Jamil, who Askia brought him in. You can still hear him every Tuesday morning, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. And he also, I'm sure, will be talking about Malcolm, Nation of Islam, and our own Askia Muhammad. So we're very
I
proud.
agree. I agree. I'm glad to hear that. Jamil is Jerry Ball's brother, so
Yes.
it's good and glad to hear Jamil. In fact, Jamil, you may be already teeing up and listening. Uh, One of my favorite songs, not only in that spirit, but literally out of the Nation of Islam, was from a calypso singer named Eugene Walcott, who was known
Mm.
as the Charmer, who was in Boston, and Malcolm X, fishing in Boston, converted this brother to Islam. His 92nd birthday was last week, and he recorded a song with the Nation of Islam entitled "A White Man's Heaven is a Black Man's Hell." And so I hope you'll play that, Brother Jamil. Of course, that young brother Louis Eugene Walcott, got his X in the Nation of Islam, became Louis X, and he is now known as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, I mean, there's a complicated history there with the nation and with Louis Farrakhan relative to Malcolm X. But at the time that they were both together and strong, Malcolm having brought Louis X into the nation, he did record "A White Man's Heaven is a Black Man's Hell." So, Jamil, I hope you have that on your playlist, brother. I know it's kind of strong for 2025, but anyway.
But Askia might have played it
He might have
back
played it.
then.
We'll see.
So listen at 1 p.m. and also in Kichi Taif is going to be on later. It's going to be a fabulous day. So
Yes.
make sure all listeners stay tuned all day today. It's really some powerful programming that we're very proud of. The last day of our spring pledge drive. But let's keep talking about Brother Malcolm and things that people may not know about him. Anything else? I'm sure you have a lot to share, but Greg, I'm trying to think of other things about Malcolm X that we do not hear enough about. Maybe talk a little bit about his final year and
Yes.
some of the changes that he went through that we don't hear enough about. Okay, folks, we are almost out of time, and Brother Jamil was listening. He's going to play that song tomorrow, so you can check out Brother Jamil 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. 8 a.m. We are only have a few more minutes left. We have gotten 0 pledges, folks. 0 pledges for our radio station by any means necessary. We need to keep this radio station alive. So give us a call, 202-588-9739, 1-800-222-9739. Let's have some sustaining members. Let's at least have 2 or 3 sustaining members. How about 2 or 3 new members in honor of Brother Malcolm X's 100th anniversary? Nowhere else are you going to hear 16 hours of programming in honor of Brother Malcolm. Thanks to Magic Mike, we're going to go and listen, hopefully, to Brother Dr. Carr's last final words, but then we're going to hear a very special song to end off this show by Bernice Johnson Reagan, which some of us heard Friday night. Please give us a call. Please go to the website and make a pledge. Coming up next is Mwizi Mutali and James Pope, Malcolm's influence in Africa.
Focused, to stay committed, to stay together. Steve Bannon has announced, he said this years ago, they want to throw everything at us we can to keep us disoriented. There's a lot of distraction. But guess what? These people are weak. This is a moment of weakness. This is the death knell for white world supremacy. And Malcolm offered speeches in a book called The Death of White World Supremacy. He called that. We will win as a species. We will win as a people. Just stay focused, stay together, stay committed, stay disciplined. And remember, we have everything we need to win. And when we win, everybody wins. And I'm sure Malcolm would say that now.
Absolutely. And everybody stay together, and WPFW is helping to do that. So thank you very much, Dr. Greg Carr. We'll see you tonight.
Yes, ma'am. See you tonight. Thank you, Johnny, Mike,
Okay.
everybody at PFW.
Thank you.
There's a new day coming, everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? There's a new day coming, everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? For far too many years I've been marching, singing and talking, doing things I thought would make me free. While people halfway around the world, they've been fighting and dying and bleeding. Now it seems that they're gonna be. There's a new world coming, everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? You know the book, the Bible, you read it and you see. It will surely come to pass. This is how it's gonna be. Those that were weak and humble would come and gain the earth. Them that shuddered at the bottom would rise and rule the world. There's a new world coming, everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? The nations of Asia and Africa, they're taking over their lives. To sisters and brothers south of us, oh, finally getting wise. Then take a look, United States of the North American climb. Your strange mixture of wealth and hate, you won't be exempt this time. There's a new world coming, everything is turning over, everything is turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? There's a new world coming, everything.
Okay, folks, you're listening to Bernice Johnson Regan, and I'm sure that song reflects what Malcolm would be telling us. There is a new world coming, and where are you going to be standing when it comes? We're not going to be continuing with these fascist people that we have for too long. We're going to be taking over this world of ours. We do have a few people to thank. I think my dear friend, my beautiful friend Adora made a pledge, and one of her relatives was with a woman with a sleeping car porter. She made a generous pledge. And Mikey, I think we have a couple more people two other people to thank.
Actually, three. We had Alice Jackson just called in and made a pledge to the show. We have Anonymous from Washington, D.C., and Catherine from Arlington wants to say thank you, Joni.
Okay, so how much more do we need, Mikey?
It actually, give me 1 second because it doesn't calculate. 1 second.
So, folks, again, we just have
you have made gold, Joni.
Wow, terrific. Okay, folks, thank you. And we know we can keep on keeping on if we support WPFW. Again, stay tuned for Mwiza Mutali and James Pope, Malcolm's Influence in Africa, 12 noon. Voices with Vision with Netfa and Brother Craig, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Brother Askia Muhammad, Malcolm and the Music, 3 p.m. Brother Kaba. You don't want to miss Brother Kaba. He's going to have a lot to say today, 3 to 5. 5 p.m. Ambrose Elaine Jr. is coming back. Welcome back, Ambrose. 6 o'clock, Mimi Rosenberg. 7 o'clock, Reflections with Nkichi. And then from 8 to 12, midnight, music with Brother Oz Collective, Brother Craig, a DJ Underdog from 10 to midnight. Folks, we need you. We need this radio station now more than ever, as we always do. 202-588-9739, or make a pledge to the website, wpfwfm.org. Our last day of the pledge drive. What a better way to go out than with 16 hours of Brother Malcolm X from 8 a.m. till 12 midnight. Keep your radio station and your ears tuned. I will see some of you tonight at Howard University with a beautiful tribute to Brother Malcolm. Thank you, Mikey, and let's keep those phones ringing. Let's keep this station strong so we can do what we need to do to make sure you can hear us, to make sure our staff is getting paid, and make sure that we are continuing to fight the power with all the strength that we have right here, following the footsteps and working together with Brother Malcolm X.